Welcome to this session on one of India's tallest, most charismatic leaders. Netaji was many-faceted. He really held some kind of amazing magnetic appeal for most Indians and people beyond our shores. He invoked passions beyond compare. He fought valiantly, and he never gave up on his dream of a free and independent and proud India. And everything that he said revolved around the cornerstone of his philosophy. You're not given freedom. Freedom is not given, it is taken. Krishna Bose was the daughter-in-law of the late Krishna Bose, who was the daughter-in-law of Sisir Kumar Bose, Subhas Chandra Bose, and the wife of Sisir Bose, someone who was instrumental in Netaji's escape from his residence at Elgin Road. She has written a number of times about Netaji, extensive writing on her uncle-in-law. And this is a series of essays that she has written, which Sumantra, her son, has edited and translated. Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose Life, Politics and Struggle. Sumantra, I think it's only appropriate, since we are in Shantiniketan, that we start with the relationship between Netaji and Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore. And there's a fascinating tracing of the evolution of the relationship between Netaji and Tagore, from the time of his initial, in his words, strong, he was suspicious, to put it plainly, about Netaji. He couldn't quite trust the motives or Netaji himself. But there was a sea change. From that he went to becoming a complete champion of Netaji, having complete faith in him, and thinking that he is the leader that India is looking to and needs. In fact, I don't know if people know, he dedicated Tashit Desh to Netaji. And he called him, he hailed him as the leader of India. Tell us a bit about that.
Right, thank you, Oindrilla. Thank you, Atri. First of all, I'm delighted to be at an event where the original ethos and intent of Tagore's Shantiniketan is still alive, even in these times, and also to be a part of this excellently curated program. The book we are discussing consists of 18 essays and articles on various aspects of Subhas Chandra Bose's life, politics and struggle, which my mother wrote, mostly in Bengali, a few in English as well, between the 1960s and 2017, just a few years ago. The chapter on Tagore and Bose is one of those 18 essays, and she wrote that in the early 1990s. You're right, Oindrilla, it was a remarkable evolution. Tagore and Bose first properly met in the middle, probably July 1921, when, and this is a very little known fact, they happened to return, just by chance, by coincidence, on the same ship from England to India. And Netaji, just after his sensational resignation from the Indian civil service, which instantly made him, at the age of 24, a household name throughout India, though people thought it was a mad act. Nobody got selected for the ICS and then rejected it.
His mother was very upset.
Those days. Even his mother was very upset. This was gold dust, and she thought her son was throwing away a golden career. Can I have the second slide? Important, I guess, number 2. I'm really happy that my mother's, original, in some cases seminal, and rightly celebrated writings in Bengali on Subhas Chandra Bose are now finding a much wider audience with this with this English translation. I've written a few books myself, but with a moderate degree, I would say, of critical and popular success. But this book, published just 6.5 months ago, to coincide with the 75th anniversary of independence, is just about to be published in paperback. It's a nationwide bestseller, and the paperback, the jacket, cover, front and back, is what you see displayed up there. Tagore and Bose had long conversations during that voyage back to India, and of course through the 1920s and the 1930s, Subhas Chandra Bose rises and rises in the national movement, culminating with his first appointed term as the President of the Indian National Congress in early 1938. Of course, as we know, he was sadly unable to complete his second elected term a year later in 1939. Now, I mention this, let me just give him some instructions. একটা click করুন, দুটো, তিনটে, that's it. Okay. You probably recognize this place, Shantiniketan's Amrakunju. And this is Rabindranath Tagore giving Subhas Chandra Bose public felicitation at Shantiniketan's Amrakunju at the end of January 1939, just around the time he won his second Congress presidency, a second term against Gandhiji's wishes. So you can see that Rabindranath Tagore obviously differs with Mahatma Gandhi on this issue. He's serenading Subhas Chandra in Shantiniketan. Next, that's it. This is another shot from another side. At the end of 1938, Netaji decides to run for a second term. And Gandhiji and most of Gandhiji's followers in the Congress leadership are not keen on that. But Tagore is very keen on Subhas Chandra getting a second term. And in a letter to Pandit Nehru, Rabindranath's secretary Anil Kumar Chandu explains why. And the letter is there in this article, but I'll just give you a couple of phrases. He says that the poet believes that there are only two modernists in the Congress High Command. One is, he said, you, Nehru, and the other is Subhash Babu. And the poet is, quote unquote, very eager that Subhash Babu should get a second term. Of course, it didn't work out that way, but Netaji, of course, won fair and square in the IICP Electoral College vote against Gandhiji's nominee, Pattabhi Sitaramaya. And then the worst crisis in Subhas Chandra Bose's already 2-decade-long political life ensued, because he was at loggerheads with most of his colleagues, with Gandhiji himself, Gandhiji's followers in the top leadership, like Patel and Rajendra Prasad and others, and with Pandit Nehru caught kind of uncomfortably in between. Throughout that phase of crisis in Netaji's life, when he became estranged from the majority of his colleagues, Rabindranath Tagore stood beside him like a rock, literally a rock of support. So, for example, when Subhas Chandra was mistreated by some of his former colleagues in March 1939 at the Tripuri session of the Congress, Gandhiji openly expressed his shock and anger in a letter to Gandhiji. Tagore expressed his shock and anger in a letter to Gandhiji. He told Subhas Chandra in a letter to Subhas in early April 1939 that you mustn't resign the Congress presidency under all this pressure. You have won it fairly. It's yours. And he said, "Tomar jonno bolchi ne, desher jonno bolchi." I'm not saying this for your sake, but in the interests of the country. But again, Netaji had to resign. Things were not just difficult, but had become impossible at the end of April 1939. And then Tagore sent Bose another telegram, and commending him for, quote unquote, the decency and restraint he had shown in the face of provocation, and telling him, your apparent defeat will pave the way to permanent victory.
I want to ask you a question here, Sumantra. I mean, this is just a short digression. I know people constantly think that what if? I know Congress had made it very difficult for him. They brought in these rules and regulations that if you have to appoint committees, what you want to do with commissions, etc., you have to run it by us. It has to be with Gandhiji's approval. But what if he hadn't resigned? How different would things have been? What if?
Well, he realized he'd already been elected for 3 months by the time he resigned. And he realized that he would just be a lame duck president. Because Gandhiji, let's remember, excelled at non-cooperation. he had tortured the British through non-cooperation, and now he was torturing his young colleague through using the same tactic. Just to continue a little bit about the Tagore-Bose relationship, on 12th August 1939, the Congress leadership takes disciplinary action against Subhas Chandra Bose. And Gandhi shoots off another cable telegram. Tagore shoots off another cable telegram to Gandhi protesting this, and says that not only must the disciplinary action be immediately revoked, but in the interests of national unity, Subhas should be invited to work with the rest of you. This photograph, incidentally taken by my late father at the age of 19, is, as you can see, the foundation laying ceremony of the Mahajati Shodhan in Calcutta, just a week later, 19th August 1939, where Tagore is the chief guest. You can see Bose and Tagore sitting on chairs, and Subhas Chandra Bose, my grandfather, is sitting on the floor between them. Apparently there was a huge crowd, because it was rare for Tagore and Bose to appear in public. And Netaji had visualized the Mahajati Shodhan as a public building where our national culture in all its diversity and forms would find expression. And it didn't become that, of course, but he had asked Tagore not only to preside over the foundation laying ceremony, but he asked Tagore to name the building. So Mahajati Shodhan was named by Rabindranath Tagore. So this was the relationship, what the relationship came to in the final years of Tagore's life. Now, some of you will be very familiar with Rabindranath's extraordinary tribute to Subhas Chandra's qualities of leadership, titled Deshonayak, and that is also written in 1939. Unfortunately, regrettably, Deshonayak was not made public until after the Second World War. So Netaji never quite knew how Tagore had come to regard him. Well, of course he knew, but I think he would have liked, reading Deshonayak. And the original draft of Deshonayak in Tagore's handwriting is displayed in the Netaji Museum at 38 by 2 Elgin Road, Netaji Bhawan. And I did something rather audacious. I dabbled in translation as well. In fact, not very long ago, I translated my mother's early life autobiography. It's a beautiful book called Harano Thikana, which was about her childhood, her growing up, her youth, adolescence, youth, and early youth. And it came out from Ananda Publishers in Bengali in 2014, and I translated into English as Lost Addresses in 2015. So I did something audacious and tried to do a Bengali English translation of Deshanag, which is in this book, and included at the end of that article. And of course, the famous beginning line of Deshanag is Subhas Chandra, Bangali Kobi Ami, Bangladesher Hoye, Deshanagের পদে তোমাকে বরণ করি. And my inadequate English rendition of that is Subhas Chandra, as a Bengali poet, I, on behalf of Bengal, recognize you as Desho Nayak.
That's wonderful, and in fact his entire written thing is here.
It is here, it's reproduced in full.
There.
There's one very small postscript about Tagore and Bose that I want to add.
Yeah.
Should I?
Yes,
Yes?
sure.
Okay. So, as many of you know, Netaji escapes from India with my father's help in January 1941.
And he sent for Sharat Chandra Bose. He wanted to.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So, when the news of his quote-unquote disappearance was released, deliberately 10 days after he had actually escaped from the same Elgin Road house, Netaji Bhawan, telegrams poured in. So Gandhiji cabled, via truth. He's always after truth, as we know. Tagore cabled from Shantiniketan. Please keep me informed. Now, sometime in April or maybe May of 1941, the Sharat Chandra Bose, my grandfather, who's sitting in the middle on the floor in that picture, is summoned to Shantiniketan by Tagore. Tagore is in his final months. It may not surprise you today to know that Tagore was deeply worried about the future of Vishwabharati once he had himself passed from the scene. So he wanted someone of the eminence of Sharat Chandra Bose, who of course was a leading barrister apart from being a top nationalist leader, to play an important role in Vishwabharati's affairs to safeguard its future. That was the reason for the visit. So both Sharat Chandra and my grandmother, Vibhavati Bose, they came to Shantiniketan and they stayed for a couple of nights at Tagore's invitation. Now one evening, Tagore suddenly asked Sharat Bose, my grandfather, তুমি আমাকে বলতে পারো, তুমি আমাকে বলতে পারো, precise words. You can tell about Subhas. So this put my grandfather in a real bind, because he had kept the top secret escape from even their mother, Prabhavati Bose, who was frantically worried about the quote-unquote disappearance of her always wayward and unpredictable son. So then he told my father, actually, after returning to Kolkata from Shantiniketan, that he said, Rabindranath's plea, "Tumi amake bolte paro," was so heartfelt and sincere that I couldn't but tell him. So basically, everybody else was asked to leave the room, and Sharat Bose told Rabindranath, quote-unquote, the truth, to borrow Gandhiji's phrase, and there's a little PPS, postscript. In 1984, my parents, Sisir Kumar Bose and Krishna Bose, they visited Shantiniketan, and during that visit, they met with Rani Chando, the widow of Tagore's secretary, Anil Kumar Chando. And my parents asked Rani Chando, do you remember a visit by Sharat and Bibhavati Bose to Shantiniketan in 1941? And she said, yes, I do. And she said something very interesting happened. One evening, Rabindranath wanted to speak privately to Sharat Babu, and not only was everybody asked to leave the room, Anil Kumar Chando stood guard at the door while the two had this private conversation.
And, you know, another little postscript. While Tagore and Gandhi, I think, had a lot of respect for each other, it was Tagore who called him the Mahatma, I think, the first time. Father of the nation was Subhas Chandra. It was Mahatma was Tagore. Every time he addressed an appeal for right to be done, as he thought, it was ignored, and it wasn't just Subhas Chandra Bose. It was Jallianwala Bagh also. Inexplicable that the Mahatma didn't respond to something that seemed so clear and so right. But that was just a postscript, personal one.
Stubborn and autocratic.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I want to move to Professor Edward Farley Houghton. For someone who was seen as the villain in the matter of Netaji's exit from presidency, he seemed to be inordinately upset, shattered by Netaji's death after the Taipei crash. And he wrote a poem about Subhas Chandra Bose, which is here. He talked at length to Krishna and Sisir Bose about that time. So what really was it? Did he have an epiphany of sorts? Or was he never really as black as he was painted? What? Because it seems to be at variance.
Right. So I think to an audience in Bengal, the Houghton incident doesn't usually need a kind of a recapitulation. Edward Farley Houghton was a young professor of English at Presidency College. He was in his early 30s when he's said to have been beaten up by a group of students allegedly led by Subhas Chandra Bose. Netaji never either confirmed or denied this. He left it ambiguous, even in his autobiography. Led by Subhas Chandra Bose. So Subhas Chandra Bose was then rusticated or expelled from Presidency College and also barred from Calcutta University for a while until the principal of Scottish Church College, Urquhart, took him in and he was able to complete his graduation. So, but before that, Principal James of Presidency College, Netaji describes the meeting in his autobiography. To me, he said, or rather snarled in unforgettable words, Bose, you are the most troublesome man in the college. I suspend you. I said, thank you, and went home. And then he writes, Netaji writes in his autobiography, my principal expelled me, but he had made my future career. I had a foretaste of leadership, although in a very restricted sphere, and of the martyrdom that it involves. In short, I acquired character and could face the future with equanimity. So the Houghton incident, in a way, launched the future Netaji's political career. And a very important milestone in his early life. The photo you see from there is, believe it or not, my parents, Sisir Kumar Bose, who is in the photo, my mother was taking the photo, so she's not in it, is standing on 55 and a half years after that famous incident in Presidency College. Houghton, by the way, he rose high. He became the DPI, the Director of Public Instruction of the whole of Bengal. He had a very successful academic and teaching career here. And 55 and a half years later, Edward Farley Houghton is 87. He died less than 2 years later, in April 1973, at 89. My parents traveled in a political train from Waterloo Station, which is very close to LSE. to a town just south, about half an hour south. It's in the commuter belt of London called Walton-on-Thames, where Professor Outen and his wife, Mrs. Outen, lived in retirement, and they spent the better part of the day with him, were given a very typical, English tea and sherry at the end, and all of that. Professor Outen was simply thrilled to meet them. For example, for tea, he had invited a neighbor, I think another, elderly gentleman, and throughout the tea, Professor Outen spoke to him about the many-sided talents of Subhas. He recounted the story of how Subhas had aced the Indian Civil Service exam just to show that he could do so, and then excuse me, and then coolly resigned from it in order to serve his country. He shook his head and said again and again, Subhas was a remarkable man. And the way my mother ends this article is that how to explain the old man's frank admiration of Subhas Chandra Bose. Yeah. I wondered. And she puts up three possibilities, or some combination thereof.
Yeah.
Was it some British sense of fair play and sportsmanlike spirit? Frankly, I doubt it.
Yeah. So
was it his own individual magnanimity? Possibly.
Maybe.
He was a generous, open-hearted man who has really been demonized for the last 100 years.
Or maybe he had an epiphany.
He may have had an epiphany. Yeah. Or, the most likely, was it something about Netaji himself that converted adversaries into admirers? Okay. So, Edward Farley Outen was an English poet of some distinction, and he was extremely grieved when he heard of Netaji's martyrdom in August 1945, and he was overcome with grief, and as an outlet for that grief, he wrote this sonnet. And it is a eulogy to Subhas Chandra Bose, the Indian freedom fighter. And it starts, did I once suffer Subhas at your hand? I would, your patriot heart is stilled, I would forget.
So she'd say, hurry up, Subhas. You know those British people trailing you, the spies are waiting, hungry, and he said, let them wait. And he had no sympathy for them, obviously. Then the fact that he was such an emotional person, and even though his demeanor, outward demeanor was calm and collected, and Deshbandhu in fact teased him by calling him crying captain because he could burst into tears. And that also shows how strong he was, because I think it takes a really strong man to be able to shed tears publicly. And of course, his relationship with European women, other than Amelia Schenkel, people who had a profound influence on his life always. They remained his friends for life, and maybe you could tell us about what the relationship was, especially unusual because he was so shy and reticent before that with women.
একটু এগোতে হবে, এখন আমি বলে দিচ্ছি। ওকে, এখান থেকে শুরু হতে পারে। আচ্ছা, এবার এখান থেকে শেষ হবে। So, my mother wrote an article which came out in the Illustrated Weekly of India, which was then edited by Khushwant Singh in the early 1970s, about the most important women in Netaji's life. And that constitutes the first of the 7 sections into which this volume is divided. The women who influenced Netaji. And of course there is his mother, a very formidable woman, Prabhavati Bose, Second is his adopted mother, whom he called Ma all his life, Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das's wife, Bashanti Devi, and with whom I think he found the kind of intimacy and chemistry that he had craved but not found with his own mother, and which Bhabhati Bose acknowledged without any grudge at all. The third of the four is Vibhavati Bose, whom we've already had occasion to mention, my grandmother, Subhas Chandra Bose's wife, and Netaji's beloved Major Bodhidi. And as my mother says in this book, Vibhavati Bose's life was also one of struggle and tribulations for decades. And she came from a very well-heeled North Calcutta family. Her parents had married her to a person they thought was this rising young barrister, a life of affluence and no trouble at all. And what a life she had. And my mother says that she's like Tagore's Urmila, Itihashi Upekhita, but that she was a freedom fighter in her own right. The fourth of those four women is, of course, Emilie Schenkel, his Austrian partner, his wife, and and my mother says in the article on Emilie Schenkel that it's quite evident. I knew Emilie Schenkel as well. She died only in 1986. I've stayed with her in Vienna and so on, and of course met her many times. My mother and my father were especially close to her. And my mother says quite rightly, because I know this from my own experience, that it appears that Netaji liked tough, independent women. The model of the Indian woman, which he tried to cultivate later through for example, the Rani of Jhansi regiment of the Indian National Army, because Emilie Schenkel was this tough, independent woman who worked throughout her life to support herself, refused assistance from the government of India, after independence, brought up their daughter Anita on her own, and all of that. I mean, she was a tough cookie. I remember her well. It's not so known, however, that Subhas Chandra Bose had very warm friendships with a number of European women, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them because it's one of the 18 chapters in this volume, and these women are little known. Netaji, the Congress President, Netaji, the Azad Hind Supreme Commander, we know about. We know about Netaji's great escape from India, but what this book does, you're absolutely right, Oindrilla, is that it sheds light on on the more personal aspects of Subhas Chandra Bose.
Human.
It humanizes him, and it brings out the human being alongside the less known human being, alongside the revolutionary and freedom fighter that we all know. This is his. This is the letter of resignation from the ICS, and I brought it along because there's a fake that circulates on the internet, and a fake version, and it was displayed even at the Victoria Memorial Exhibition on Netaji 2 years ago. This is displayed in the Netaji Museum at 38 by Trivandrum Road, Netaji Bhawan, and this is the original letter of resignation from the ICS, so very matter of fact. Next. Now, this is Jane Dharamveer, whom Netaji addressed as Didi from the time they met in April 1921 onwards. April or maybe May 1921. One of Netaji's closest friends was Dilip Kumar Roy, the musician and mystic, the son of Didendra Roy. And Subhas had resolved to return to India, to join the national movement under Gandhiji and Deshabandhu's leadership. But before he left, Dilip Kumar Roy and he spent a few days with a Punjabi physician, Dr N.R. Dharamveer, and his wife, Mrs. Jane Dharamveer, who was English but of Russian origin. She had some Russian background in her, at their home in Lancashire. So Dr. N.R. Dharamveer was a staunch nationalist. He was thrilled to meet this unusual young man who had rejected the golden career of being a servant of the Raj, and servant and an enforcer of the Raj. Dr. Dharamveer, in fact, had been a friend of Lala Lajpat Rai and all of that, being from Punjab. So he would constantly make rude remarks about the English and the British. And Dilip Kumar Roy noticed that whenever Dr. Dharamveer did so in the presence of his wife, whom you see here, but this is a photo from 1937, Subhas changed the topic because he clearly didn't like this. Well, to cut a long story short, Subhas Chandra Bose was very shy and reticent around women, and the meeting with Jane Dharamveer was the beginning of a sea change in that part of his attitude and personality. And Dilip Kumar Roy says that he was completely floored by Mrs. Dharamveer, by her sophistication, but also by the warmth with which she treated him. Because he was too shy to speak to her too much in person during their stay in Lancashire, he wrote a letter to her.
I just want to butt in here once. When they were leaving, I thought that was very touching. When they were leaving on the train, she packed food for them.
Yes.
And last minute, she threw in 2 extra packets, one with chocolates and one with fruit.
Exactly.
And that brought him to tears almost.
Yes.
He said that, I didn't know somebody could care for me.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So he had felt very uncared for when we started late, so we can go a little bit more, till 4 o'clock maybe, just about 4 o'clock, 10 minutes. Yeah. So so he wrote a letter to her expressing his gratitude and his appreciation, and the letter is Aka Baka writing because the ship was swaying while it wrote. So this was the beginning of a very close, lifelong friendship between the Dharamveers and Subhas Chandra Bose. In 1937, after his release from a year in imprisonment, Subhas Chandra Bose spent about 6 months with the Dharamveer family, living with them in their holiday home in Dalhousie in the Himalayas to recoup his health. He had been in very poor health, he'd been hospitalized and so on. It was such a very happy time for them. So this is Netaji and his Didi in Dalhousie in 1937, Poritadin. Bas. This is, I think they've been walking in the mountains or something.
That's her daughter.
That's one of her daughters, Laila Dharamveer. There was another daughter, Sita Dharamveer. Sita Dharamveer became a doctor. She qualified already in the 1930s, and Netaji acted as matchmaker for her marriage, facilitated her marriage to a fellow doctor, a Bengali guy. If you look, very carefully, you'll see that Mrs. Dharamveer is cradling a cat. Once they were traveling, her pet cat. Once they were traveling in a train from Pathankot to Dalhousie, and the cat became very agitated by the rattling and became a bit crazy. And this is the cat. This is also in Dalhousie. You can see Dr. Dharamveer is on one side of Netaji, Mrs. Dharamveer on the other side, and I think the local people have come to pay their respects to him because word has got around that he's staying there. So this was just as Bashanti Devi was Subhas Chandra Bose's mom. This was his Didi. And he had sisters of his own, but this was his kind of papa, no? Into, in the substantive sense, older sister. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say, you mentioned the Rani of Jhansi regiment, and Captain Lakshmi Swaminathan, later Saigal, has said, she's quoted here, that people find it difficult to understand what a big feminist Netaji was. Mm-hmm. And he wanted them to be equal in every way. And there's also a bit of a sea change there, because earlier on it's mentioned that when Deshbandhu wanted his wife, Bashanti Devi, to get into politics, be arrested Subhash was horrified.
Mhm.
He said, how can you do that?
Mhm.
And he was so relieved when she was released, and Deshabandhu was very upset. They actually released kore dilo to kichhui kaj holo na. But it's really interesting to read about the fact that he, one, never expected anybody to take risks that he didn't take,
Mhm.
and he expected that women would be equal to the task of fighting the enemy.
Yeah, he gave his first address
Yeah.
to the initial 24 recruits of the Rani Jhansi Regiment in Singapore on 12th July 1943. And he urged them to emulate two women in history, Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi and Joan of Arc of France. And he said that I am convinced that India cannot hope to be free until women play their full and equal role in the struggle.
I just want to, we will take questions, a couple of questions, but I have to ask you one question. There's so much that's been said and written about Netaji and Nehru. Now, they were, as Tagore pointed out, they were young, charismatic leaders with mass appeal. They, in approach, they were forward-thinking and modernistic as far as governance was concerned. But they remained at loggerheads almost all their lives. Now, you also go on to, you've edited, translated that. It also goes on to say that while Nehru blindly complied with whatever Gandhi's views or wishes were, even when he didn't agree, Netaji, though he respected the Mahatma, he called him the father of the nation, he gave him that name, he did not comply blindly. That was something that he didn't do. So, was this one of the main factors, the lack of trust generated because of the Gandhi factor? Was it their basic difference in upbringing and their habits?
I'll go into that. Let's just very quickly, I won't speak, go through the remaining slides.
Yeah.
This is another one of Netaji's close friends. You can read about her in the book. She's standing next to him. This is in Budapest, although she lived in Vienna. And her name was Hetty Fulop Miller, and she was a famous opera singer of Europe.
She's performed in Calcutta.
Yeah, on All India Radio in 1936, when she came to visit my grandparents. Next. Again, this is in Bad Gastein. It's in my mother, my brother Shugato and I, and Anita, my aunt, and Martin Pfaff, my uncle. We visited Bad Gastein, but in summer, in June 2008. This was, it's in Salzburg province of Austria, where Subhash and Emilia used to hang out a lot. And this is in around Christmas time. And you can see Emilia on one side, she's the little short one, the petite one. And Hetty Fulop Miller wearing something on her head is on the other side. You can see how close they are. And next. This is a letter to another very close friend, Mrs. Vetter, who helped him a lot, like Frau Fulop Miller, and also from Vienna. And Mrs. Vetter used to write articles supportive of Indian independence in newspapers and journals across Europe. Hetty, the opera singer, she was a kind of a star of Viennese society. So she introduced her young Indian friend, Subhash, to the who's who of the academic, cultural, and political worlds of Vienna. This is in the mid-30s. This is several years before the Anschluss. So Mrs. Vetter, next to him, actually you probably can't read it, but these are lovely little handwritten letters. And in it, he says that he's sending Mrs. Vetter and her husband, Dr. Vetter, some Indian mangoes. It's really beautiful. Next one. This is in April 1941. So Subhas Chandra Bose has arrived in Berlin at the end of his great escape from India, and one of the first people he writes to is Frau Leonie Vetter. And it's basically a letter of condolence because her husband seems to have died, and the handwritten postscript at the end, please address the reply to O Mazzotta, which is his Italian pseudonym, fake identity under which he traveled from Kabul to Berlin. Next. This is Subhas Chandra Bose speaking at a public meeting in Berlin in August 1933, I'm sorry, and it may have been one of the occasions when another very close friend of his, Kitty Kuti, met him for the first time. I can't be 100% sure, but I...
That's written here.
Yeah, but I think so. And this is very interesting because although they met and became friends in Berlin, Kitty Kuti was actually Czech from Prague. And she especially hated the Nazis. And she was not happy with his trying to cultivate the Nazi leadership. But it didn't come in the way of a very warm and close friendship developing. And next slide, guys. Next. The PS in that letter, Netaji is writing in December 1935 to Kitty Kuti, I often wonder why you stay in Berlin. Don't you find the atmosphere suffocating? He's encouraging them to leave. And initially they think of going back to Prague. And he tells them, her and her husband, Alexander Kuti, no, don't do that. Because they will come there. I'm sure they will come there. So he told them to emigrate to the United States, which is what they did. I've met Mrs. Kuti in 1981 in the United States. Alex, her husband as well. They were elderly by then. My mother, of course, has met. She didn't meet Jane Dharamveer. But she met all the other three repeatedly, Harry Kunal Miller, Kitty Kuti, and Naomi Fetter. Kitty Kuti wrote a wonderful tribute in the form of a memoir called Subhas Chandra Bose as I Knew Him in 1966. The last lines, where are you now, my friend? Whatever did happen, whatever may be the case, greetings to you, my brother. May this letter find you in peace, whether in this world or the other. So you can see. Okay, on Bose and Nehru, and we really have to finish. There's a remarkably, incisive article on the Nehru-Bose relationship that my mother wrote, very shortly after Nehru's death in 1964. It originally came out in the Statesman, and it's not really true that Nehru and Bose were at loggerheads.
He served on his commission, the planning commission.
Yeah, and Subhash wrote to Jawaharlal that I have regarded you as an elder brother in the movement, sought your advice, etc. The relationship soured in 1939 during that Congress split because Netaji felt let down by Nehru. Because he said, these other people around Gandhi, they've never liked me anyway. So their hostility doesn't surprise me. It doesn't really bother me either. I knew they didn't like me. And they have poisoned Gandhiji against me now. But Nehru, he knows, is actually sympathetic towards him, Subhash. And yes, Tagore is absolutely right. They are the two modernists in the High Command. They're on the same page on most things. We are temperamentally different, and our approach to life and its problems is not the same. Netaji was very clear-cut in his thinking, very decisive. Nehru, my mother characterizes him, my mother was a professor of English literature, she characterizes him as Hamlet-like, with a to be or not to be kind of dilemma all the time. Besides the difference in temperament, I think Nehru was right, by the way. One other factor came between the two men, Mahatma Gandhi. Nehru had a practically unconditional allegiance to Gandhi, and Gandhi exercised a hypnotic power over him. But Bose, while deeply respectful of Gandhi, it was Bose who called him father of the nation, during the war, in a radio broadcast from South Asia, and always addressed him as Bapu, to Sharat Bose also, Bapu is like a figure of absolute reverence. But Bose was not as mesmerized as Nehru by Gandhi. Like Bose, Nehru did not agree with Gandhi on many matters big and small. He agreed much more with Bose in substantive terms. But whenever a dilemma or crisis arose, he surrendered to Gandhi's will. Gandhi too showed great patience with Nehru in disagreement. On one such occasion, Gandhi wrote to a fretting Nehru, and see how artful he is. Resist me always when my suggestion does not appeal to your head or heart. I shall not love you the less for that resistance. And my mother comments that Gandhi did not show Bose the same affection and consideration in 1939. So my mother concludes by saying, a Bose-Nehru progressive alliance remains one of the most intriguing counterfactual scenarios of India's history. But it could be that Nehru regarded the young man not so much as a potential ally, but as a potential rival to India's post-Gandhi leadership. And her last paragraph, I think, is beautifully stated. The ultimate destinies of the two men were very different, and so is their place in Indian, Asian, and world history. Jawaharlal Nehru is chiefly remembered today for his 17 years in power in post-colonial India. Subhas Chandra Bose, on the other hand, lives in history and in the collective memory of the Indian people as the leader who challenged colonial power.
I think that's wonderful. And it's just one of the places that they majorly agreed and disagreed with Gandhi was foreign affairs, how they go about dealing with leaders from abroad. We were to ask just two questions. We have time for two quick questions in case anybody has questions. Questions? Anyone? No? Yeah, I see a hand. Yes? Yes.
Yes, one thing, you said that there was no conflict between Netaji and Nehru. But
no, he didn't say that.
One thing, that recently declassified documents showed that the Indian government spied upon the Bose family for nearly 2 decades. Why is it that? Why are they so suspicious?
Okay, this is a rather interesting question because I have actually viewed the files in the question. These were part of declassified West Bengal government files, which Mamata Banerjee declassified in September 2015. My mother received the declassified documents, the whole pile. I accompanied her for the ceremony, and this was in September 2015. And the only thing of interest that came out was, as you say, sir, this spying that went on in both of our houses. One, Woodburn Park, which is Subhas Chandra Bose's house, and on Netaji Bhawan, 38 by 2 Elgin Road, and since 1957, the home of the Netaji Research Bureau, of which I'm the director now, which my father established and built up. And, it's exactly like the colonial times. The Elgin Road post office, all incoming and outgoing letters are being opened. They're completely, personal, family letters. I mean, they're nothing secret or terribly private, but it's private correspondence that N.V.S. Schenkel is writing to my father, Sisir Bose, and vice versa, that are being opened, copied, reported on. And most frighteningly, there are casual agents who are posted at both the Woodburn Park and the Elgin Road houses who are reporting daily on the household routine. I mean, who is coming and going, and most of it is useless information. It's a typical day in the life of a household. And they're recording all of this. And this went on after independence until we are seeing from those files, at least 1971. Now, the question is, who is doing this and at whose behest? That we can't tell for sure. But, there is another side to the story. I mentioned that Nehru, N.V.S. Schenkel refused to accept any financial assistance from the government of India. I mean, she worked in a post office, and she said, "I'm going to bring my daughter up with my own livelihood and earnings." But Nehru persuaded her. It took a lot of persuasion as Prime Minister to let the Congress, he said, the Congress was your husband's party, and we want to do this for a former comrade, that we want to set up an endowment for Anita's education, and especially her higher education. And she reluctantly agreed. So this is the other side of the story, and Nehru agreed to do this. And in my father's early life memoir, Boshubari in Bengali, Subhas and Sarat in English, which I actually edited. The English version came out only in 2016. Boshubari is from the 1980s. Nehru, my father recounts an episode. He's gone to Parliament House to meet Nehru, and he finds Nehru chain smoking. This is early 60s, towards the end of Nehru's premiership. And my father says to him, Panditji, I recall you used to smoke when you used to stay with us at Woodburn Park in the late 1930s. Both Gandhi and Nehru would always stay in Shamatra Bose's house when they came to Calcutta and Bengal. And I remember also, Panditji, that you used to task me with going out and buying your favorite black and white Markovich cigarettes. Cigarettes were then sold in tins, not packages. But I remember you used to smoke 2 or 3 after dinner, and not otherwise, but you're chain smoking now. So, so Nehru said to him that, I've heard that Subhas also used to chain smoke during the war, isn't that so? And it is true, he used to chain smoke, especially in Southeast Asia, the Southern period. And then he said, somewhat apologetically, it's the strain, you know, that's why I do it. Then he paused for a moment and said, I suppose it was the same with Subhas.
Thank you so much, and that was about one of the most magnetic, intriguing, towering, and larger-than-life figures that we will ever know in the politics of this country. Please read this, because what it does is humanize him. Tell us wonderful nuggets that we didn't know about him.
Copies
Makes
are
it.
available.
Yeah, copies are available at the Oxford store, and I'm sure Sumantra will oblige if you want to.
I forgot to mention this, Oindrilla. This is the other compilation of my mother's writings I've done since her death 3 years ago. It's an omnibus anthology of her more than 100 of her articles and essays on very diverse subjects, which she published between 1951 and 2020, a 70-year period. So for those of you who prefer Bangla, please do look this one up as well. Krishna Bose Netaji Research Bureau, 1919-2020, Ananda Publishers, 2021.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for an absolutely fascinating session.
My pleasure. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.